You're a thief and a disgrace. My father screamed, throwing me out pregnant and penniless. For 17 years, they slander my name. When they finally found me, hoping for a bailout, they went pale. The air in our house always smelled faintly of lemon polish and unspoken resentment. On the surface, we were the perfect American family, especially on Sundays. My father, Richard, would sit at the head of the dining table, beaming with a pride that never quite reached his eyes. My mother, Helen, would flutter around him, adjusting his napkin, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. And my younger sister, Chloe, the golden child, would recount her latest trivial triumphs from high school, being voted onto the homecoming court, the lead in a school play she'd barely rehearsed for. They would all laugh, a sound like glass chimes in a room with no breeze. And then there was me, Clara. At 19, I was the family's unseen cog, the silent engine running in the background. While Chloe was celebrated for her beauty and charm, I was hunched over the chaotic ledgers of my father's construction business in his cramped home office. The scent of old paper and stale coffee was my perfume. I was the one who juggled the frantic calls from suppliers, who negotiated payment plans, who found the accounting errors that kept us from going under. I was the responsible one, the serious one, the boring one. My sacrifices were as invisible as the air they breathed. That particular Sunday was heavier than most. It all comes down to the Henderson payment, my father announced, his voice tight as he cut into his roast beef. $30,000. If we don't have it in cash for the supplier by Wednesday, we're finished. He looked directly at me, his gaze sharp. I'm trusting you with this, Clara. The money is in the safe. Don't mess it up. Of course, Dad, I said quietly. Chloe snorted softly from across the table. Don't worry, Dad. Clara doesn't do anything but worry about your business. It's not like she has a life to distract her. My mother shot her a weak, warning glance, but said nothing. The barb hung in the air, a small poison dart. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the truth behind them. My life had become a series of his emergencies, his anxieties. I was so busy holding his world together that I had forgotten to build one of my own. 2 days later, the world fell apart. I walked into my father's office to get the cash for the deposit, and a cold dread washed over me before I even touched the safe. The air was thick with panic. My father was pacing, his face pale and slick with sweat. It's gone, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Clara, the money. It's gone. I stared at the empty metal box. $30,000. Vanished. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but before I could form a single coherent thought, the office door creaked open. Chloe stood there, her face a mask of counterfeit anguish, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. Dad, I didn't want to say anything, she stammered, her voice trembling artfully. But I saw her. Late last night, I saw Clara sneaking in here. She took a shaky breath. I think she has a boyfriend, Dad. Some worthless guy she's been hiding. I heard her on the phone, saying she needed to get away. The accusation was so outrageous, so perfectly timed, that it stunned me into silence. It was a lie spun from whole cloth, yet my father's desperate eyes latched onto it like a drowning man to a splinter of wood. He turned to me, his confusion curdling into suspicion. The walls of the small office seemed to close in on me. The weight of their stares, the missing money, the secret I had been holding so tightly in my own chest for weeks, it all became too much. The words tumbled out of me, a desperate, unplanned defense. I'm pregnant. It was the wrong thing to say. It was the worst possible thing to say. In my father's mind, the two explosions, the missing money and my pregnancy, fused into a single, catastrophic event. He didn't see a scared daughter in need of help. He saw a motive. He saw conspiracy. Chloe's lie had given him the answer he needed, an answer that wasn't him. So that's it, he spat, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. His face contorted, veins pulsing in his neck. You steal my money to run off with some trash and the bastard child you're carrying? He took a step closer, his body radiating a fury I had never seen before. You're not just a disappointment. You're a thief. No, I whispered, shaking my head. Dad, that's not true. I didn't take it. He didn't hear me. He didn't want to hear me. He looked at my mother, who had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. Did you hear that, Helen? The daughter we sacrificed everything for. A common thief. My mother looked at me, her face a canvas of horror and shame. But her shame wasn't for his cruelty. It was for me. Clara, she whispered, her voice cracking. How could you do this to us? To your father? That was the moment my heart truly broke. It wasn't his rage that shattered me, but her instant, unquestioning betrayal. In that single, fleeting moment, I was utterly and completely alone. The rest was a blur of violence and finality. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh, and dragged me through the house. I didn't fight. I was numb, a ghost in my own home. He threw open the front door and shoved my duffel bag, which I'd half-packed for a weekend trip that would never happen, onto the manicured lawn. You are no daughter of mine, he roared, his voice echoing in the quiet suburban street. Get out. Don't you ever come back. He went back inside, grabbed the house key from my keychain on the hall table, and threw it onto the ground at my feet. It landed with a soft, metallic clink on the dewy grass. As the heavy oak door slammed shut, I looked up at the window of Chloe's room. For just a second, I saw her silhouette, watching, and I could feel, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, the cold, triumphant smirk on her face. That image, that feeling of being erased by my own family, was burned into my memory. I stood there for a long moment, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The shock had cauterized the wound, leaving behind a hard, unfeeling scar. I bent down, not to pick up the key, but to look at it one last time. Then I straightened up, picked up my bag, and turned my back on the only home I'd ever known. As I walked down the silent street, a strange, cold thought surfaced in my mind. They didn't just throw me out. They handed me my freedom. Freedom, it turned out, tasted a lot like cold metal and desperation. My first few nights were spent in my beat-up, 15-year-old sedan, parked in the far corner of a 24-hour grocery store lot. I would recline the driver's seat as far as it would go, the worn vinyl sticking to my skin, and stare up at the buzzing orange lights. Every passing pair of headlights felt like an accusation, every distant siren a judgment. I wasn't just cast out. I was an unperson, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that no longer had a place for me. My world had shrunk to the contents of my duffel bag and a box of crackers I ate one by one to make them last. The hunger was a dull ache, but the solitude was a sharp, physical pain. It was in those long, cold nights that I finally allowed myself to think about Michael. Michael, with his kind eyes and easy laugh. Michael, the brilliant medical student I had fallen in love with. Michael, the son of Harrington Enterprises, my father's most hated and successful business rival. Our love was a secret garden we had tended in the shadows, knowing that bringing it into the light would start a war neither of our families could win. When I found out I was pregnant, we had talked about it. He wanted to tell his parents, to stand with me, but I was the one who said no. I couldn't bear the thought of our child being born into that battlefield, of being seen as a weapon or a scandal. My silence hadn't been an act of shame. It had been an act of protection, a protection that had ultimately left me with nothing. On the third night, the loneliness became unbearable. I sat in the dark, my phone clutched in my hand, its screen the only light in my cramped world. I scrolled to my mother's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. A primal part of me, the child within, screamed for her mom. I craved the simple comfort of her voice, the lie that everything would be okay. But then, the image of her face in the doorway flashed in my mind, not with compassion, but with cold, bitter disappointment. The memory was a splash of icy water. She hadn't been my protector. She had been his enforcer. With a trembling finger, I deleted her number. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The scared girl was gone, and in her place, a survivor was beginning to take root. The next day, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. Clara? Is it you? The voice was firm, familiar, but one I hadn't heard in years. Aunt Margaret? Thank God. She breathed, a wave of relief in her voice. I knew it. I knew that story was a load of bull. Your father is a proud fool, Clara, and your sister has a cruel streak a mile wide. I've been calling everyone trying to find you. An hour later, I was sitting in a clean, warm diner, a half-eaten plate of pancakes in front of me. It was the best food I had ever tasted. Aunt Margaret, my father's estranged older sister, sat opposite me, her eyes filled with a pragmatic sympathy that was more comforting than any amount of pity. He pushed me out of our father's business 20 years ago, she said, stirring her coffee. Said I was too emotional, too aggressive for a woman in construction. The truth was, he couldn't stand me telling him he was wrong. I know what he's capable of when his pride is on the line. She slid a plain, white envelope across the table. There's $5,000 in there, and the address of a small apartment I keep in the city. You can stay there. Tears welled in my eyes. I don't know what to say. She held up a hand. This isn't charity, Clara. It's an investment. You're smart. You're tough. You're going to pay me back with interest. I'm investing in you because, frankly, you're the only one in that family worth a damn. Her words were a balm on my raw, wounded pride. She wasn't saving me. She was giving me the tools to save myself. The next 17 years were a testament to that investment. The first 4 were a blur of diapers and textbooks. I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy I named Leo. During the day, I worked as a waitress, the smell of grease and bleach clinging to my clothes. At night, while Leo slept soundly in his crib, I attended a local community college, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning determination. I earned my associate's degree in accounting, and, with my first decent paycheck from a junior bookkeeping job, I sent Aunt Margaret her first repayment check. The years that followed were built on the same foundation of relentless work. I moved from a small firm to a larger one, all while earning my bachelor's in finance online. I was a machine. While other people socialized, I studied. While they took vacations, I took on freelance projects. My colleagues saw me as quiet, intense, and ruthlessly efficient. They didn't know I was building a fortress, brick by brick, around myself and my son. A fortress so high and so strong that the ghosts of my past would never be able to scale its walls. Leo grew into a bright, kind, and observant boy. He had my determination and Michael's easy smile. Michael and I had reconnected when Leo was 5. He respected my fierce independence, my insistence on building my own life before blending it with his. He became a loving, long-distance presence in Leo's life, a partner to me in every way that mattered. Our relationship was our own, built on our terms, far from the toxic ruins of my first family. By the time I was 36, I had my MBA. I had identified a glaring weakness in the market. Small to mid-sized construction companies, just like my father's, that were run on pride and gut feelings instead of sound financial strategy. I left my comfortable corporate job and launched my own consulting firm. My personal history gave me an edge, an almost psychic ability to diagnose a company's rot. I wasn't just a consultant, I was a surgeon, and I was wildly successful. I had finally built a world they couldn't touch, or so I thought. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking the city, reviewing a new client's disastrous balance sheet. The name on the caller ID was Aunt Margaret. "They're going under, Clara," she said, her voice devoid of any surprise. "Richard's company. It's a matter of weeks. Chloe's spending and his pride finally did them in. They've lost the house." She paused, and the irony is someone at the bank, someone who doesn't know the history, recommended a financial miracle worker to them. He gave him your name. A cold, still feeling settled over me. It wasn't shock or fear. It was the quiet calm of a general seeing the enemy walk into a perfectly prepared ambush. "So, they'll be calling," I said. It wasn't a question. "Any day now," she confirmed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to invite them into my home," I said, my voice steady. It's time they saw what they threw away. 3 days later, they stood on my front porch. My house wasn't just a house. It was a statement. An architect-designed structure of cedar, stone, and glass, nestled in a grove of old trees. It was the physical manifestation of 17 years of sleepless nights and relentless focus. I watched them through the tall window beside the door before they could ring the bell. They looked diminished. My father's expensive suit was dated, his shoulders slumped with a weight that wasn't there 17 years ago. My mother clutched her worn purse like a life raft, her eyes darting around, wide with disbelief. Chloe stood behind them, a scowl etched on her face, her trendy clothes looking cheap and out of place against the backdrop of my life. I opened the door. "Hello," I said, my voice even and gracious. The shock on their faces was immensely satisfying. They were expecting to find me in a small apartment, perhaps. A struggling single mother. They were not prepared for this. They were not prepared for me. I was no longer the scared 19-year-old girl they had cast out. I stood taller, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dress, the quiet confidence I had earned radiating from me like a low hum. "Clara," my mother breathed, her jaw slack. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. They walked into the entryway, as if stepping into a foreign country. Their eyes darted around the open-plan living space, taking in the high ceilings, the tasteful art on the walls, the light pouring in from the floor-to-ceiling windows. I led them to the living room and offered them a seat. They perched on the edge of the custom-made sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable. They stumbled through clumsy pleasantries, the conversation littered with backhanded compliments. "We always knew you were resourceful," my father muttered, unable to look me in the eye. We were just trying to protect you," my mother added, her voice thin. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. Finally, my father, unable to maintain a charade, got to the point. "We're in trouble, Clara," he said, his voice cracking with humiliation. "The business. It's a daughter should help her family." I let the sentence hang in the air, its hypocrisy sucking the oxygen from the room. Before I could respond, footsteps sounded on the floating staircase. Leo appeared. At 16, he was tall and handsome, with a calm, intelligent presence. He was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, but he carried himself with an innate grace. "Leo, these are your grandparents, Richard and Helen. And your aunt, Chloe," I said, my voice level. Leo nodded politely. "It's nice to meet you," he said. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sob escaping. "So," my father said, "try to regain some semblance of control. What are your plans for the summer, young man?" Leo smiled. "I'm pretty excited, actually. I got a summer internship at my dad's company, Harrington Enterprises." The name hit my father like a physical blow. Harrington, his rival, the man he'd spent a lifetime hating. He stumbled back a half step, his face turning a sickly, ashen color as the 17-year-old puzzle pieces slammed into place in his mind. "You with him?" he whispered, staring at me as if seeing a monster. Chloe, seeing her father falter, jumped in. "See, Dad? It was always a lie. She was with him the whole time. She probably planned to ruin you from the start." "Let's talk about lies, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade like a shard of ice. I leaned forward and placed a thin, leather-bound file on the marble coffee table. "Aunt Margaret is a much better bookkeeper than you are, Dad, and she keeps excellent records." I opened the file. Inside, pristine and damning, were copies of bank statements from 17 years ago, and on top, a letter from a casino's debt collector, addressed to Chloe, demanding payment of $32,000. Chloe's face didn't just go pale, it crumpled like paper. The years of practiced superiority vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly fear of a cornered animal. "You always thought you were better than me," she shrieked, her voice cracking with venomous hysteria. "Always so perfect, so smart. I'm glad I did it. You deserved it." My mother stared at the documents, her hand over her mouth, silent sobs shaking her body. My father just stood there, his jaw slack, the entire foundation of his 17-year-old righteous anger dissolving into dust before his eyes. He had built his narrative on a lie, and the architect of that lie was his own golden child. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, desperate. "Clara, please. We're family." I looked at the three of them, the broken man, the weeping enabler, the venomous child in a woman's body, and I felt nothing. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving only cold, clear certainty. "No," I said, the word quiet but absolute. You are the people who threw a pregnant girl out on the street over a lie you wanted to believe. I cannot help people who refuse to take responsibility for the ruins they create. I stood up. The meeting is over. I'll see you out. A week later, I was standing on the stage of the city's grandest ballroom, accepting the Chamber of Commerce's Business Leader of the Year award. I spoke of resilience, of building something from nothing, of the importance of integrity. As the applause began, a commotion erupted at the back of the ballroom. I saw them, my family, pushing their way through the crowd, security guards trailing behind them. They looked frantic, unhinged. Richard, his face red and blotchy, managed to get to a microphone on a nearby table. "That woman," he yelled, his voice amplified throughout the silent hall. "She's my daughter, my long-lost daughter, who abandoned us, and now she refuses to help her dying father." A collective gasp went through the audience. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. For a split second, the world tilted, the old shame threatening to pull me under. But I wasn't alone anymore. From my table near the stage, two figures rose and walked purposefully towards me. Michael and Leo. My Michael, handsome and solid in his tuxedo, and my son, his young face set with a resolve that mirrored my own. Michael calmly took the microphone from my trembling hand. His voice, steady and strong, filled the ballroom. "My name is Michael Harrington," he said, and another murmur went through the crowd. "For 17 years, I have had the privilege of watching this woman, Clara, build an empire from the ashes you left her in," he said, looking directly at my father. "She didn't abandon her family. Her family tried to destroy her." He then put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "And this is our son, a son she raised to be everything your family is not. Honest, kind, and strong." Leo stepped forward. He looked not at his grandparents, but out at the hundreds of faces watching him. His voice was clear and unwavering. "My mother taught me that family is built on love and respect, not on lies and manipulation. I have never been prouder to be her son." The humiliation was absolute. My father stood there, exposed as a charlatan and a liar in front of the entire city's business elite. He visibly deflated, the last of his pride and fight draining away, leaving an old, pathetic man in its place. The security guards finally reached them and escorted the three of them out of the ballroom. They didn't resist. There was no fight left in them. My father's final, desperate gambit had not only failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. The silence they left in their wake was deafening, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I stood on the stage, flanked by the two men in my life, the two pillars of my world. I looked at Michael, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. I looked at Leo, who gave me a small, reassuring nod, his young shoulders squared with a maturity far beyond his years. Tears of gratitude, not of sorrow, welled in my eyes. I turned back to the microphone, to the hundreds of faces still staring at me. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion but stronger than it had ever been. "As you can see, I have already received the greatest award tonight." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. My family. The ballroom erupted. It started with one person, then a dozen, then the entire room was on its feet. The applause wasn't just polite. It was a roar of validation, of understanding, of support. It washed over me, a wave of warmth that cleansed the last remnants of the cold, lonely nights in my car. It was the sound of a chapter finally, definitively closing. Later, I learned from Aunt Margaret that the public spectacle had been the final straw. The family didn't just implode, it vaporized. Chloe and my father, stripped of their public facades, turned their bitterness on each other, each blaming the other for their ultimate ruin. My mother was simply lost in the crossfire, a silent casualty of a war she had never had the courage to prevent. I felt a brief, distant pang of pity for them, but it was like remembering a story about people I used to know a long, long time ago. That night, back in my house, the award sat on the mantelpiece, its golden finish catching the soft light from the lamps. It was beautiful, but it was just an object. The real prize was gathered in my living room. Aunt Margaret was there, recounting the story of my father's face when Michael took the stage, a wry, satisfied smile on her face. Leo was demonstrating to Michael some complex move in a video game, their laughter filling the quiet space. The house was alive, not with the sterile tension of my childhood home, but with the easy, breathing warmth of genuine love. I stepped out into the back garden, the cool night air a welcome balm. I had designed it myself, a rambling English-style garden with overflowing rose bushes, the one thing I had always dreamed of as a child. The scent of the night-blooming jasmine was sweet and intoxicating. The war was over. The fortress I had spent 17 years building no longer needed to be a fortress. It could finally just be a home. A moment later, Michael came out and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You okay?" he whispered. "I'm better than okay," I said, leaning back into his strength. "I'm free." We stood there for a long time, in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the dark velvet sky. Leo and Margaret joined us, and the four of us just stood together, a small, unlikely constellation of survivors. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. We talked about Leo's college applications, about a trip to Italy we were planning for the fall. We talked about the future. Looking at their faces, illuminated by the warm light spilling from the house, I felt a profound sense of peace settle deep in my bones. For so long, my life had been defined by the door my father had slammed in my face. It had been the wall I raged against, the motivation for every struggle, every victory. But tonight, I realized the truth. I was never locked out. I was set free. Free to build my own house, with my own doors, and most importantly, free to choose who I let inside. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that trust is thicker than blood. Respect is thicker than blood. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can ever do is walk away from the water that tries to drown you. What defines family for you? Is it the one you were born into, or the one you build? Share your thoughts below.